Greetings, BookTube. It's been a while. This is ML Clark coming to you with Better Worlds Theory YouTube edition. It has indeed been a while. In my primary role, I am occupying a few different posts right now, not just communications coordinator, but doing a lot in the realm of volunteer coordination and web development, front and back end. It's a lot of learning and wonderful. It's a tremendous gift to be able to continue to acquire new skills over the course of one's life. Not always ideal to do it in crisis scenarios, but sometimes you have to roll with the punches. Nonetheless, because of these tremendously time consuming tasks, it has been very difficult. And on top of that, I still have a ward, which is interesting. She's now 16. Still very much needing a lot of direction because of circumstances beyond her control, a lot of them with the hard life that she's come from, a lot of them with the arbitrary nature of our entire global ecosystem, such that she cannot be in traditional schooling. So homeschooling becomes a huge factor as well while she's still working, and as she's been for years, so a very hard childhood the rest of the days. With all of that in mind, I finally just said, I need a break and I need to read some science fiction and reconnect. I am actually also delighted to say that I have another story ready to send out, hopefully in just a couple days. I had been tinkering with the concept for a while, but after a profoundly intense work sprint, I just carved out a window for myself and a lot of the words poured out. It's looking good, and I'm looking forward to sending it out soon. I also have a story in the latest issue of Analog. That's not in my valley. That's the one that was inspired by Steven Spielberg's Duel, and it has a tone to it that I am champing at the bit to be able to apply to a longer novel project soon, something that deals with some classic labor and class themes and sort of the material realities of space, eventually, when time allows. I am a little cautious when I say that I have the story out now, because it is up to everyone to make the decision about where and how to support different magazines and industry. A tremendous number of phenomenal writers are writing and publishing in Analog and Asimov, and hopefully again fantasy and science fiction when it reopens in a more effective form. But when I started at my current position in April, I also was just in the middle of being part of the first wave of authors affected by a situation with the new distributor for Analog, Asimov's, and fantasy and science fiction. And it's been a complicated thing as a writer to navigate self-advocacy when you are facing a contract that doesn't look right, when you are also communications coordinator for a large writers organization that has its own advocacy team. I'm not part of the advocacy team. I just publish the materials, the press releases, and so forth. You get caught in a very strange position. And at the same time, I also have published with Analog, been very privileged to publish with Analog for a few years now. And I know Trevor and Emily are wonderful people, and the editors elsewhere are as well. Sheila Williams has always just been so generous with her time and her insight, and they're just talented people working in all of these spaces. And the issue of Asimov's that I am going to reflect on today is a brilliant issue. There's so much wonderful science fiction happening that I don't think a lot of people get to read, in part because this is a paid model. You don't get free content as you do in Clark's world and Uncanny and other spaces like that. And so this wealth of extremely in-depth prose just often finds a different audience, let's say. But I'm going to talk with a lot of adoration for the brilliant authors here. I was so excited to dive into this issue because I adore all, pretty much all of the authors on this list. I'm just thrilled with the work in this issue, yet at the same time, the issue that I and other authors were facing with our contracts has reached a better result than we were at a few months ago, and yet it's a long-term process. When somebody comes into the industry and there's an immediate issue that breaks trust, it can take a while for trust to return, and there's still work that needs to be done to improve and hold those contracts to a higher standard. Really important. So, as much as I am going to glowingly talk about the phenomenal curation and wonderful storytelling today, I don't want anyone to come away with the feeling that I'm trying to pressure or endorse supporting something before you're ready to. I will say that I certainly hope our whole industry can heal from this moment and its ongoing work. And I'm going to continue to celebrate my fellow writers and creators and the editors who support all of our work in the middle of this. So, without further ado, I'm actually not going to spend too much time on the nonfiction components. Sheila has a lovely reflection on another event that highlights the rising stars, the next generation, and that's always lovely to see. And Silverberg has a wonderful piece on ancient encyclopedias, which is well worth the read. But I just want to dive into some of these stories. So I'm going to go through, and again, apologies to the poets, because I actually really enjoyed the poetry here as well. But I feel like it's a slightly different thing to comment on the poetry, and it can take up a little more time than I have. But the poetry is just really sharp in this issue as well. I'm going to start by talking about Most Things by Rich Larson, and I want you to sit with the title of that for a second. Rich Larson has a wonderful career, and it is a mark of that wonderful career that you can truly get away with a fairly understated title, because you know when you're reading a Larson story, you are going to be immersed in a world. And what makes the difference in Asimov's is deeply rich characters, and more than that. And when people talk about what that means, what does it mean to have a rich character, a really thoughtful, character-driven story? What you aspire to is a story in which the characters had full lives before the incident happened. Whatever the incident is, you want it to be clear that they already had a trajectory. They're doing things. They're going places. They already have their hopes and dreams and perspectives. And maybe what's going to happen will change all of that. But we need to really be convinced that they had lives before the story started. And that is absolutely the case here. We've got Mac and Arvo in a drug-addicted high, a little bit of Hunter S. Thompson feel to the start. And it's because one of them is starting to lament, his birthday, he's getting old, he's not, he's 29. But the two of them are taking on a job that's going to, give them a little bit of distraction, something to do. It's a kidnapping job of a woman named Dr. Shayna Gripson. And yet almost immediately, things go off the rails a bit amid all of their lamenting about mortality at a ridiculously young age and their deep, existential thoughts and thinking about transcendental reality in certain ways through drug addiction. Dr. Gripson doesn't seem surprised to have been kidnapped, and it becomes very clear when they start to find a pursuer coming after them, specifically coming after her. It then starts to unfold that Dr. Gibson is trying to get herself out of a situation that was caused by some research going on in the lab involving quantum realities, a different kind of transcendental plane, a different kind of altered way of being, and what they worked with, what seems to be a parasite or a virus of some kind, to her mind has well and truly infected one of her coworkers to the point that he's no longer himself. He's just become a vessel, a kind of zombie-esque figure. Actually, also, when I was reading this, I was thinking, I wonder if this story would have passed Neil Clark at Clark's World has a rule: no zombie stories. But I'm so curious if this one had been floated past him first, because this seems like the kind of story that could almost make and break the rules. Maybe his rule. But the story that unfolds is a very intense try to get Dr. Gibson out to the safe point, learning what's going on, learning more about these alternate realities that are tied into the research that Dr. Gibson is doing and that her colleague seems to have been killed by. And what it leads to is a completely different kind of existential understanding of reality. And what's so beautifully done about this story, and again, Larson's prose is in this point effortless, it's just rich, deep, and immersed. These characters really come to life, is that it's already in keeping with what the characters were wrestling with, those themes of mortality and those attempts to, move to a higher plane through other substances. It's just fleshed out by a real world circumstance and experience of their own, not just something that they're quoting, that will help to grow and shape them in some interesting ways, very interesting ways. I'm underselling the ending, but that's the kind of confident writing you get after a career of this. And that's the kind of character writing you should aspire to. You don't have to be Hunter S. Thompson, they don't all have to be drug addicts, but the point is have characters who feel alive before the main event happens. Our next story does a different kind of immersive world building. Tobias S. Buckell's In the Halls of the Makeshift King builds a whole other kind of way of being and thinking about ritual and religion, faith, pilgrimage through a world in which some people, when they are lost and looking for some kind of escape, will go to this labyrinthine, underground, cavernous construct in which lies the great door, and they will try to be part of the work. They're going to be so excited to have their turn pushing this great door based on a kind of gear system. The idea is that the door only moves a tiny, 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 tiny fraction, and it requires the help of so many people. And the whole world has been framed around this possibility of being able to make a difference, to be part of something. And so you can get to themes that are extremely important to humans today about the idea of what does religion do, how does it serve, through a fully imagined other world, more or less. We don't know the world outside of this pilgrim path because we're already on it. But you can see a different way of thinking and its impact on people's outcomes. In this world, there is now a lottery to choose the makeshift king every cycle, a person who will decide if they are going to continue to push this revolving door in one direction or go in the other direction. And it's this momentous choice set upon somebody at random to again try to uphold greater moral virtues or ideals. And we have Yain as the one who's going to have to make that choice, but the whole story is about why these things come to be in the first place, and again staged out in another fully formed world. Another way that we have nuance, it comes in Dominica Phetteplace's Another Mother on Mars. And as the title suggests, it's a story about deciding whether one is going to be a mother, or specifically if they're going to give birth to another life. Among Martian colonists, Terrans who've gone to Mars, who've dedicated their lives to obviously the pursuit of colonization, but are now a little bit tentative on the threshold of, are we ready to bring in another life into this environment that we've been working on a technical level, an experimental level, a scientific level? What does that mean? What are the implications going to be of that? Is it better to do it naturally? Is it safe, or is it going to cause problems? Is it going to create a scandal? Would it be better to do a clone? There are so many different possibilities, and this story is attentive to the fact that there is a whole society of expectations once you have firmly rooted and started to build an active colony on Mars, there are next steps and there are consequences to those next steps. So again, it is a thoroughly imagined moment in the future that itself, well, I mean, I don't know how realistic it is considering everything we're experiencing today, but if we were to get to Mars, what next? What does it actually look like? What is the material reality of setting about trying to and making the choice to raise a child, birth a new human being into that kind of environment? In our next piece by Derek Künsken, we have something that's a little bit classic in the sense that I think some folks will have a sense of where it's going just because there is a very common theme here. We have nonetheless some wonderful variation, and it's played to great effect. We have this scientific team that is investigating the properties of what they call a kind of dragon species on another world. Specifically, the qualities of this dragon species have been adapted into useful technology that can augment the humans who are trying to work in the mines and otherwise survive on the planet. So you can use this other species to improve. But the dragons are dying out. There are a few other worm species on the planet, but somebody needs to figure out the dragon song. We need to actually be able to connect with what's necessary to get the dragons to continue to thrive. And that's where Jai comes in. But Jai's implants have caused some interesting problems. And one of them involves the fact that with these implants, she's starting to feel more distant from other humans. She's becoming more dragon-esque herself in some ways. And that's a real struggle because she has a wife, Zhao Hui, who is recognizing this divide and doesn't know how to help. So to become closer, to understand this dragon species and what it needs, and also to understand other aspects of the world, there is a lot of give and take and sacrifice that's happening between this couple. So another interesting way to develop a story is to take a familiar concept, because there's something with the resolution of the dragons and other species that, again, has a lot of history behind it, but to come into a story with multiple layers, to have a character who is more than one thing, not just a researcher trying to solve a problem, but also somebody with connections, relationships. That's a really good way to flesh out a world. The next piece by William Preston is Aftermath. And this one, again, there's some lovely curation in this issue because there's another story that's going to deal with time. But this one does it in such a deft and nuanced way. Aftermath, as is mentioned within the story, is reflecting the idea that just because a crop has been raised does not mean that the next crop is automatically going to be ruined. Oftentimes a secondary crop, the aftermath of the first one, is going to have a different kind of richness to it. And that is the underlying through line, the thematic through line of this gentle mystery in which an investigator is hearing reports of these strange encounters among some people on a planet with phantom images, and not just images, even conversations, full interactions, dreamlike, strange, isolated with other beings on this desert world. And through it, there comes the sense that maybe they're traces of something that came before, which is quite lovely. And it's I won't overshare in terms of what that meditation means and what its impact is, but this idea of truly living with the past and walking alongside it is a beautiful concept, and done in a way that can feel quiet, but it lingers, which is exactly what a memory should do. So that's a lovely addition to the issue. We have Michèle Laframboise, who was written in The Gardener's Service. This one also has a lot of character lessons to it. I wasn't as much of a fan of the time skipping because it keeps going back and forth a little bit, but each scene nonetheless is richly developed, and it does something that I quite enjoy in stories, which is it creates a protagonist who is not intrinsically a kind of heroic figure, somebody that's actually quite flawed in many ways. In this case, vanity is a huge part of this character. This person works within the Imperial Garden, and in that space, vanity is kind of important. You're in competition with other people. There's no real other currency except these kinds of interplays on that kind of high court level, and this person definitely was consumed by a lot of them. But in some ways, that vanity and that fixation on those kinds of details also gives this character an attention that allows him to be very useful when he recognizes that something has gone amiss in court, that there is a problem. We're involving a woman who's gone missing, a young lady, and it seems to be tied up in a young love affair that is being manipulated by the courts, by people who are older and insecure about their power, a sister who's really scared for her. And in that moment, Sirius Codelsi can rise to the occasion using some of that insight from his vanity, from his particular life experience, to do one good thing, and a really cleverly good thing at that. So this world is fleshed out by having a character who is an unwitting hero in some ways, and not the unexpected one. Doesn't make him any less vain in general, but there's this one space where he can do some good and does. The next piece, this also, again, calls attention to some of the really great work of character development. Stephen Case's Pirates of Highship imagines an extremely talented and industrious and intelligent, far-seeing young man who happens to have a mother who owns half the galaxy. So he's a rich person's son, but has quietly tried to live his life exploring a mystery. And what's really great about this character study is that his exploration means that he's going through storm clouds in this planet that's just absolutely constantly afflicted by all kinds of very strange weather patterns, and it affects life on that planet significantly, but he's after a deeper truth. And yet, and this is a really important note to develop good stories, he's got this one trajectory. He has this one little quest. When in the pursuit of that, he does get hit and his craft starts to fall. He's scooped up by a sort of ruthless trader who doesn't really give a damn about his quest because she's got her own life and she's not impressed with his highfalutin, grandiose ideas at first, until she can be convinced that there's some kind of benefit in it. But that's a really good way to develop complexity in a story. This other character, Chin, who's not interested in Odin's story, only the value that his materials might be able to bring her on market, has her own complexities, her own fraught love affair with another pilot in the area. And so Odin has to try to find a way to survive and to continue to defend work that seems in many ways extravagant to people who are just living everyday lives in this ecosystem. And so you get a really richly developed world by just remembering that every character has their own quest. And just because one quest may seem grand and wonderful and will improve the scientific advancements, there's also a little bit of Stanislav Lem in this one, but it doesn't go quite where you think it's going to go, does not mean that everyone else is going to immediately go on board, because life is filled with many different people and many different motivations. The next story is a really sweet one if you've been following Robert Reed's Great Ship series. So this one ties up the story of two lovebirds, Perri's fate. Perri is looking for his beloved wife, Keely, and this universe I've mentioned before is rich. It covers generation after generation after generation for millennia. Species change. Our notions of what a species is changes. The Great Ship is absolutely immense in concept. It contains multitudes. And through those multitudes, Perry is just trying to find one life form that slipped through his fingers at one point. And what this story does has a lot of a sense of finality to it, a kind of love song to the whole series and the whole world that Robert Reed has built. So if you haven't read the Great Ship series, go back and read some of his other stories before getting to this one. But if you have read his other work, it is a really satisfying and tender conclusion to a lot of the concepts that he's been building all the while. The next piece by Lavie Tidhar is The Courier. That one's, I would say it's the slightest of the stories here, and it still does its work by having our main character, Yara, as a courier on Mars, and there's a little bit of a Wild West feel to some of the work that she does, but mostly the story is a vehicle, kind of, pun intended, to meet different personalities on a Mars colony. So even though it doesn't really have any deeper momentum in terms of Yara's character, it fleshes out the ecosystem, or an imagined ecosystem for a colony, one visit at a time. And the final piece is Suzanne Palmer's The Chronolithographer's Assistant, which is just really wonderful. I will say it could have been a shorter story. There was a point where I could feel a natural ending for a short story, but because it develops past that episode, we get further richness, we get further connections, tying of loose ends, a developing of a deeper world. So it's a story that definitely was sort of itching to be longer, even though it could have stopped a little bit sooner. We have 16-year-old Thomas Neary in the 19th century who does not want to go to sea and work on the ships like his brothers. His father died, and he does not want to be another person afflicted by that kind of grueling life, but there aren't many other options in his small town. So he goes up to Mrs. Hammond's cottage, a little tiny removed space. He knows that she does lithography, she does some kind of artwork, and maybe she needs an assistant. And he's very polite and very eager, and Mrs. Hammond takes him on, and he does a lot of careful work around the space as they get to know each other. And one day, as she's teaching him a certain part of the process, he does something that sets the deeper events in motion. So he does something that opens up the secret world of Mrs. Hammond and the explanation as to why she always has so many fantastic goodies and treats and things that don't quite seem easy to get locally, and why she's just a person full of mystery, doesn't quite fit in with everyone else. So again, this issue is just filled with wonderful writers who have mastered their craft at creating character-driven worlds in the fullest sense of what that means, in the sense of having people who are living full lives, thinking their quest is the most important, thinking that their trajectory is the most important before it encounters another person's trajectory, another person's quest, or is confronted by a situation that is unexpected and takes them in a different direction. It's filled with worlds that are imagined fully enough to be able to present concepts that are of relevance to ours, but in a deeply different form. And it just is so much an affirmation of what I love the most about our genre. So that's it for me today. Just going to wrap this one up. It was a thrill to get back to reading, and now I have to prep a story of my own to send out. Thank you for listening. If you did, hope you're having a wonderful afternoon or morning whenever you watch this, and keep reading and following and supporting the work that you love. Thanks so much. Until next time. Cheers.